You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Archaeotech Podcast for March 9th, 2015. On today's episode, Russell interviews Brian Ballsun-Stanton about the FAIMS mobile digital recording software. Today's show is sponsored by the Art of Charm training programs and podcast and by DigTech LLC's tablet program. Check them out after the show.
So, Brian, would you like to maybe give a little brief background about yourself and some of your research for our listeners?
Certainly. I'm currently at Macquarie University with the FAIMS project. The FAIMS project, Federated Archaeological Information Management Systems, is producing digital tools for archaeologists and scientists across Australia and, with any luck, across the world. Personally, I'm a technologist and I'm a philosopher. I studied databases at Rochester Institute of Technology, and I did my PhD on the philosophy of data at UNSW. FAIMS project was recently at UNSW, and so we are in the process of moving office to Macquarie.
So, as a non-archaeologist, what kind of attracted you to archaeological information, archaeological data, and how it's organized?
Meeting Sean in the hallway.
And,
I mean, so that's the brutal truth.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the challenge, it's a fairly fascinating environment to study the philosophy of data. One thing I found is every discipline tends to impart the traditions of a philosophy of data, and I'll try not to go into that too deeply on this, but a subjective or an objective or data as spreadsheet or data as Word document on its practitioners simply by the shared heritage of education. And technology, by virtue of needing to work with it all the time, has mostly dealt with that question to such a degree that it's no longer even conceivable as a question. And so instead of doing my research and my work in technology, by embedding myself in a project where data is where data is not only present to hand but ready at hand. Can you tell I've been reading Heidegger recently?
It sounds like it.
It's been rough. It actually makes it a much more effective research topic because people are struggling with it and therefore people are thinking about it. And so I've always wanted to do more of the non-traditional academic route, and FAIMS has provided that route.
That's interesting. So in the kind of philosophy of data, you're talking about how people take certain things as rote because that's the way they were trained, and it's hard to break out of that mold, but you as maybe a non-archaeologist can see, well, there's different ways this could be approached, this question
Precisely.
of how to organize your data.
And vice versa. And so if we're talking about strictly the philosophy of data, it's how do people understand the nature of data? What affordances does data provide? What is the ontological quality of data? Is data true? Is data a reflection of the real? Is data human subjectivity? Is data some sort of semiotic transformation of communications? Is data merely that which is entered into a computer? And so, my formal training in my master's and my undergrad is in infotech and in databases, and so I'm a fairly useful stranger in a strange land with regards to this project because I can approach the specific problem without having a horse in the race.
Yeah, since you don't have a stake in it, you can kind of address those questions that no one else is, given your previous experience and just that you're asking. What do you even mean by calling this a lithic? Does that mean it's just made of stone? Does that mean that it's a projectile point? There's ambiguity in these categories I think we often don't think about, and it makes it incredibly difficult to get two different archaeologists to agree on standardized terms or anything else to combine data sets. And that sounds like some of the things that you've been working on is how to approach that in a more abstract way.
But there is a downside of when I get overly technical, we tend to have lines of translation where I say something and then that gets translated by Sean, and then that gets translated by Adela, and then that gets translated for the client. And so it's all of these disciplines, each understanding the world in its own way, each asking questions of its own, and it produces a different outcome than would be from a more homogenous team.
That's interesting. I'm thinking just off topic of that scene in Hot Fuzz where the one man has a very, very thick accent, one man has a pretty thick accent, and then there's the non-accented English speaker, and they have to go down the chain.
Precisely, and there are days in the office where it really feels like that.
So you talked about Sean and Adela, and do you mind giving their last names?
I know. So the project director is Dr. Sean Ross, now of Macquarie, and so he is the deputy director of the Big History Project there. I hope I'm getting this right. He is the deputy director of the Big History Project there, and he is the project lead for FAIMS. And then there's Dr. Adela Sobotkova, who is one of the project managers with FAIMS, and is a research, I'm going to say fellow, but I could be wrong on that last bit, at Macquarie as well. And so along with those two, we also have on the leadership team Dr. Penny Crook of La Trobe University, and the four of us make up FAIMS.
Excellent. So you spoke about this being kind of a national initiative in Australia to provide data management tools and data organization tools to archaeology across the country.
So in the beginning, there was a grant application, and the grant application was approved.
And it was good.
Well, clearly it was approved. And so the grant application was with the Nectar Initiative, and 2 years in, I still can't remember what that acronym derives to. And so the Nectar Initiative is an e-research tools initiative for Australian research across all of Australia, across all disciplines. The Nectar Initiative was funding tools and virtual laboratories to improve research quality. And so one of the collaborators that we tended to run into all the time at Intersect Australia was the Alveo Human Communications Lab project. We are another one of those projects. And so our objective was to provide data, born native data collection, capture, analysis, and repository tools to Australian archaeologists. And so I'm most involved in the data collection part of the thing, and so most of this conversation will focus on the data collection part of the thing.
That's some pretty ambitious goals to have a nationwide kind of program for data collection and research. That's amazing that initiative was put forward.
We're quite lucky here with that initiative. And so that was the first grant. And that produced FAIMS 1.3, the web app and accompanying server that produced a wonderful collaboration between FAIMS and Hurist for the analytics side of things, and that produced a collaboration between FAIMS and TDAR so that we have our own FAIMS repository. And I'll be giving you all these links so that you can embed them.
Excellent. I know a few of the people I've spoken to about FAIMS would be really interested in checking out tutorials on Hurist, which is your kind of database in the cloud or database manager, and then using the digital archaeological record. It sounds like you use a branch of their software and have your own installation.
So we have forked it, and we are hosting it on Australian infrastructure so that all of the data lives in Australia, so that we don't fall afoul of any regulatory requirements.
And that was going to be one of my questions. It sounds like, obviously, with this nationwide program, there's maybe some different regulations versus the ones in the U.S. as they pertain to archaeological information and protection of locations.
Yes. And so sensitivity of data is something that was made abundantly clear to us even before the start. And during the stock-taking workshop, it's definitely the ability to maintain control of one's information that is central to all of our objectives. And so the term maintain control is a literal term of archaeologists demand that they be able to maintain control of their design, of their data, of where their data is kept, and of how their data is used. And so for that reason, the FAIMS data collection app is designed to live behind an air gap so that the ultimate control can be had of the data. It also helps that archaeologists do their research in the middle of nowhere, and so there's almost a natural air gap of data collection. And so that's a fortuitous circumstance. And I know Hurist has some fairly sophisticated access control mechanisms as well. And TDAR has very fine-grained embargo controls.
So that people can collaborate on data sets, perhaps across a research team, but not have public access, or maybe have limited public access to some of their data, but not others
Yes.
that they wish to keep private for a period of time.
And the beauty of TDAR is that they can show that the data exists without revealing the data, which allows for a number of regulatory hoops to be jumped through because the data does exist and it is requestable and shareable, and at the same time is private.
So on the Australian data repository, a researcher can basically look at an index and say, oh,
Precisely.
There's a collection.
And so here's the metadata, here's the description, but the data itself is embargoed for 5 years, or the data itself is embargoed, and you have to request access from the researcher or the community that generated it.
That's excellent, because I know some of my frustrations working in the United States as a cultural resource management archaeologist was even finding what previous work had been done in the area. Even just having an index, beyond, say, the state SHPO database that was more up to date, that just told me what companies had worked in the area, what at a general scale had been found, and that was a data set I could then use to bid on other projects in similar terrain or in similar areas, would be a very, very useful tool. And it sounds like maybe that's some of what the Australian program is looking to do, is facilitate that level of information sharing.
Yes. And so we intend to be a resource for all Australian archaeological data.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the process of getting this grant, starting with the goal of, a very lofty goal of, from soup to nuts, we're going to collect data, we're going to organize it, we're going to manage it, we're going to make it shareable and preserve it. Where did you even start in that process of looking at what components you needed to build, and then how to start collecting information on how to build them and how it would be useful to archaeologists?
In a state of great confusion. So we realized that this is both a lofty goal and a surprisingly achievable goal. And it's a question of articulating requirements and seeing what the prior art is. Because remember, we were coming at this knowing that Hurist existed. We were coming at this knowing that TDAR existed, and we wrote the grant with those collaborations in mind. And so the first thing that the FAIMS grant did was the stock-taking workshop to try to figure out what everyone thought the state-of-the-art could be and should be. And so, one of the things that we learned from that is that no one can agree on terminology, or even agree to disagree, or any iteration on that. Happily, we only had one person walk out.
That's a pretty good ratio.
It is. And so, because we split people out into those working groups, we realized that we could prescribe and proscribe no data structures for archaeologists, but at the same time, the containers for that data were fairly common across industry. They're, shape files, spreadsheets, access databases, FileMaker databases, and so on and so forth. And so in terms of the analytics and in terms of the repository, we could treat the data as, let us say, indexed black boxes, not completely opaque, but definitely isolated, and just allow it to be stored in however it decided it wanted to be stored.
So maybe search might be an issue because you are having apples and oranges compared, but at least it's all accessible. You can see that all that information or data exists.
So most of the search is on metadata, and we can index the metadata much more ably because people are much less picky about metadata rather than data. With the mobile app, again, my primary concern, my primary role in the project, my solution was just go meta. And so instead of trying to make a single data collector, we kept abstracting it and abstracting it and abstracting it till such time as we now have a general purpose, offline, multi-master, multi-device, capable georeference data collection system. And when the second grant came around, we were kind of surprised to learn that geology and environmental sciences and sociology were all very interested in what we could offer. There's an oral history project at UNSW, for example, where the ability to go into the virtual middle of nowhere, either middle of nowhere in a literal sense, where you are surrounded by rocks, or middle of nowhere in the you don't have any of your equipment, and the connectivity in the middle of the city is horrible, where you can specify precisely what data structures and the relationships between those data structures are in an XML document. So you don't need to know databases, you don't need to know third normal form. Of course, the downside to that is we basically have to do most of the module development because of the complexity of that. But that's the trade-off. And so we went for maximum flexibility, and we even went to the flexibility of realizing that not everyone on the same project would speak the same language. And so when I designed this, when I was thinking about it, not speaking the same language was much more of a jargon question. And so my thesis really referenced Peter Gallison and image and logic, his image and logic, and then the material microcultures of physics. And so I'm very sensitive to how different subdisciplines use the same word in vastly different ways. And so what we realized with Parker's, sorry, I should not refer to him by his nickname, Nathaniel van Valkenburg, his PAZC project in Peru, that different language was in fact different language. And so we were able to do an internationalization and have a data collection module appear in Spanish and in English. And the beauty of it was that the same data was being collected and stored in the same database.
That is very impressive, literally speaking across languages and not just the terminology, but being able to collect the same data.
Yes.
So here we're getting into an area of probably database design that I know myself and many other archaeologists are more used to relational models and maybe getting, possibly second, possibly third normal form. But my experience with FAIMS, you said something about abstracting actually out to 6 normal form, way beyond the level of atomicity that other databases might use.
So there's the FAIMS database, and then there's the FAIMS data structure. And it's very important to differentiate between the two. And so I designed the FAIMS database to satisfy 3 requirements. One, that the data to be collected would be defined not in a data definition language, but in the data manipulation language. much. And so these are technical terms from database land.
That
Basically, and instead of saying create table, we do all of our table definitions, in quotes, as insert statements. And so we have a table of tables, and we have a table of columns, and we have a table of rows, and so on and so forth. And so that's domain key normal form. We also had to design the database to be a multi-master append-only data store because we had to work offline.
And this is where you get into some of the issues that I've experienced, say, building a FileMaker database to work offline, is that at some point you want to merge those records together.
Precisely.
But that requires a human to go in to say at least which record to prefer in my scenario. But what you have essentially in FAIMS is where you can choose the preferred version of the record, but not have to delete previous entries. Is that correct?
Well, so we don't need to run into the question of what is the preferred version very often, because all the devices are designed to always append only, so that there's no data lost ever. But B, they're designed to work asynchronously, and so you don't normally have that kind of clobbering. But B, we have fork detection, and we have all of that capability in such a way that if a problem is detected, it's presented in our server as a conflict presented for a human to resolve the conflict or to merge records and so on and so forth. And there's no extraordinary efforts needed. Like this is not a, oh no, drop everything, you have to go into the database and you have to fit. It's no, this is a design for circumstance, this is an expected circumstance. Everything is sufficient and everything is designed with this in mind. And even more to the point, everything's reversible. So even if you say the wrong thing, or even if you do the wrong thing, you don't lose data.
This being the append-only version, in that they're never overwriting previous records. You're not deleting anything out of there.
All right, we're here with Jordan Harbinger from theartofcharm.com again, and we're talking about the Art of Charm podcasts. And over the last month, we've had some people write in and comment about the Art of Charm, and they want to know a little more about it. So, Jordan, can you tell us a little more about what they can find on your podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the term sort of like networking and relationship development is all vague and everything. So basically, we focus on a lot of things, very broad topics. Our toolkits are focused on things like body language, eye contact, vocal tonality, business networking, negotiation, relationship management, etc. But we also branch into other topics like, I had a guy on the show named Brad Salas, a guest, and he talked about millennials and how they can relate to their bosses better, their boomer bosses, and how boomer bosses can relate to the new millennials better. Because as you can see in workplaces, guys are butting heads, and it's kids are so dumb these days, and it's old people don't get it. And it's just like, if we can bridge that gap, we can be more productive. So we gave a lot of practical exercises and steps to use that. We've also talked about how to burn fat while you're working with weird things like treadmill desks and being cold while you're working in the office to burn calories while you're just sort of being you working all day. And we cover hundreds of other things, but those are two kind of concrete examples of it.
Hey, and these are real world things you can use. I've actually turned the temperature down in my home office because of that podcast about just being cold, because it's something you can do that's easy.
Yeah, and there's plenty of guys out there listening to the show who bought these weird ice vests and they're sitting there freezing right now, but, losing weight doing it. So we're weirdos, but we assume we're in good company.
That's right. Well, you can check out more from The Art of Charm at theartofcharm.com, and you can check out the podcasts on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and everywhere you download podcasts.
Thank you.
Do you see that the file sizes of these databases, do they grow exponentially as people add records, or does it stay pretty reasonable?
Well, so this is one of those words, reasonable. From a database point of view, the databases never grow into reasonable size. Like, I, as a database person, I'm used to working with multi-gig databases, right? And so we've had a few very sizable databases, hundreds of thousands of records in Parker's, for example. And so they that hundreds of thousands of records was like 150 megs.
Wow. So, and this is also
Text
just
is cheap.
when we talk about big data in archaeology, often physicists, astronomers, people like that laugh because what we talk about in terms of big data is peanuts compared to space.
Yes. And so it's a question of homogeneous data versus non-homogeneous, and archaeology is all the way in one direction. It is very idiosyncratic, very exacting, very detailed data, simply because of the destructive nature of archaeological data collection. Like, if you need another star observation, you have another star observation, barring something going horribly wrong with Hubble, right?
Yeah, you can go and make that measurement again, whereas once you dig it, it's gone.
Precisely. And so that produces very different data collection requirements. And of course, the fact that you are recording data in the middle of desert produces very different data collection requirements, because all of the epiphenomena that are the same time and time again that would fill the bulk of an astronomy database aren't collected, because who wants to stand out in 30, 40 degree heat and write down no change, no change, no change, no change, no change for something that was overly designed by someone in an air-conditioned room.
And that is definitely something that I've experienced, having designed databases and then had field workers come back and say, this does not work in the way I need it to in 120 degrees in Phoenix.
Right. Sorry. I'm getting sufficiently used to Australia that I'm starting to think it's Celsius.
Yeah. Well, it works either way. Very hot and very cold.
Yes. And so, because FAIMS also basically has a complete scripting language in it, a lot of that drudgery, there is a same again button, and it does what it says on the button. And that button is under the complete requirement control of the archaeologist, because same again to an archaeologist means copy the first field, the third field, the fourth field, clear the fifth field.
Yeah.
and so it's what we've learned is that generalization is dangerous. And so the tool is made as general as possible so that we can record complete multi-spectrum. We can record geospatial data. We can use cameras on the device. We can use internal GPS. We can use external GPS. We can use total stations. We can use various USB sensors, and so on and so forth. But we don't require any of it.
That it's all kind of up to what do they want to use at that time?
Precisely. What methodology do they use for their specific requirements?
And in working with some of the early betas of the FAIMS app, I was very impressed by two things. First of all, well, probably three things. The flexibility in it, the automation of many of the fields that you could opt to have a default, say take a location point just as a matter of course if you're working on a record. But also I noticed that one of the options in the FAIMS database is a confidence level that each person can set for essentially every field if you have it enabled, to say here's how confident I am in this measurement or in my perhaps description of this feature or thing in the soil, so that other people can look at again later with that in mind. And a note field as well to put disclaimers or more context than is normally seen in a more rigid database. Would you perhaps talk a little bit about how that came about? Was that something from your kind of philosophy of data, or is that something you found through user testing and getting feedback from the field?
So let's start from the top. In FAIMS 2.0, we have every attribute has 4 fields: constrained data, unconstrained data, annotation, certainty. And obviously, every attribute has a lot more than that. For example, a timestamp built into the attribute in the last change record, and so on and so forth. But from a data, not metadata point of view, it has those 4. And so constrained data is any vocabulary built into that attribute. And the vocabularies are defined during module creation, but they're editable on the server. And so you can have drop-downs or radio buttons or checkboxes and so on and so forth. Unconstrained data is where people can enter the equivalent of what they'd write in the blank. And so one thing that I know Andy Fairbairn's and so we're coming off of a field season where we pushed out the FAIMS module to a number of quite satisfied customers, and you can if you go to fedarch.org, we've recently revamped our splash page, and we've got some cute testimonials at the bottom of that one if you feel like reading them off at some point. I'd be embarrassed too. And so we have unconstrained data, and one of the things that archaeologists using our app have learned is offer as few opportunities for unconstrained data as possible, because people will take advantage of them. And so if you have a measurement and it's please enter the number of millimeters from this reading, there are 4 or 5 instances in 80 records of people writing small essays in that field.
Because they were given a blank, and by God, they were
given a blank. Yep. But recognizing that, we have the annotation field, and so there's an there's a little pencil icon in the app, and if you click the pencil icon, it is the equivalent of scribbling in margins. And so I recognize that desire for meta discussion in the record is inherent to the data collection process, especially a data collection process that can't deal with all of the normal course of events because it was designed before the data was collected.
Yeah, and finding things in the middle of the field that you didn't plan for beginning is a experience I think everyone's pretty familiar with. And what you're talking about now is in the middle of the field where you might not have the devices needed to make changes to the database.
Happily, with our default kit of FAIMS in a box, all of the constrained vocabularies can be modified on the server, and you're bringing the server with you in a lovely little box.
So that's something I've seen pictures of on your website and on your blog. Could you talk a little bit about the FAIMS in a box?
Well, sorry, let me answer your previous question first. The inspiration for the data structure of the FAIMS database is mine. And it basically came to me as I was spent about a month mulling over the workshop and figuring out, okay, archaeologists do take advantage of margins, and archaeologists do create very organic data, right? They write question mark after a measurement. They write 3 to 5 millimeters, question mark, hey, the ruler snapped. This is kind of iffy, but I did my best. And I realized that it's really annoying to try to average 3-5 mm, question mark, hey, the ruler snapped. A computer cannot average that. And so by breaking that up into categories of here is your measurement, here is your annotation, here is your certainty, more sophisticated analysis and less transcription time, less cleansing time. And so because every category is because there is a place for comments and because there's a place for certainty, there's no need most of the time to clean out that comment and that certainty from the data. And so you get much more usable data more quickly as a result of this process.
Well, and that seems like an impressive part of just having that data be born digital is
Precisely.
That you can start making decisions based on the initial results, your preliminary results, before maybe the data is completely cleaned, because you have things like a separate field for just numerical data that you can start looking at measurements or perhaps geospatial data almost immediately once you merge these records or get them all back on the same database. Is that something that you found in kind of field testing the application as well?
Yes. And so one of the major improvements that we made to FAIMS 2.0 was server-side exporters. And so one of the requests that everyone was making of FAIMS 1.3 is they didn't want to wait until they got back to get at their data. And so we have much more sophisticated data tools, for lack of a better term, in FAIMS 2 of, we are happy to write custom exporters of whatever you want to whatever format you want so that you can load them up in whatever program you're used to using in the field, as well as much more sophisticated search capabilities on the server for that kind of in-field reflection and in-field cleansing and in-field analysis.
That's excellent. So they don't have to wait for perhaps a database administrator back at an office or back at a university, or
Precisely.
say after the field season's over, to get where to go look for things next, or even just trying to start to build that narrative of what's going on at location or across locations.
Precisely. And so because the databases are designed to sync in real time, if you've deployed FAIMS correctly, you can actually build the idea of what's going on across locations in what amounts to real time, or at least at the end of every day, as devices come home and synchronize. And so let me be clear, with FAIMS 1.3, I was still able to get Dr. Fairburn's data to him before the paper forms arrived with his students. So you know, the beauty of the old method is romanticized to some degree, and so we've improved upon even that with the exporters of FAIMS 2.
So whenever you are, say, a person wants to use FAIMS, is there a process for perhaps coming to FedArc and saying, here's what we'd like to do, here's the sort of things we need to do, and starting a consultation on how to build those exporters or other customizations?
So the first thing is that the FAIMS project is entirely open source. At the same time, we recognize that expertise is itself valuable. So we have released all of the software open source, and we are happy to point you at the documentation and say, you know what, you're a grad student, you have some technical knowledge, have fun. Exactly 0% of our audience has fulfilled those requirements. Most of the time, our audience are archaeologists whose time is valuable. And so the exchange of time is valuable is, instead of them spending more time, they hire us and we spend less time and get a better product to them.
So this mirrors the open source model, used by Ubuntu and other Linux systems of giving away the product for free, but offering additional services, on a fee that goes back into perhaps building those exporters that they can be used as part of the open source project.
And so this is a very intentional thing. We were greatly inspired by Kevin Kelly's Better Than Free, and so personalization is one of the things that makes something better than free. And so we are happy to offer personalization tools to people because there is value there. Like the software is a commodity, but the expertise and the judgment isn't.
Well, I think that's something that, there's an XKCD comic that talks about the curve of the investment needed to learn how to do something, procedurally implement it, and then the time savings that you get after that, is worth it. But for many archaeologists, we want to be archaeologists. Some people like me are foolish enough to believe that we can try to do both, but understand that there are limitations on time and brain power. But I do like that approach of putting the tool out there and making people aware of it in that discipline, and then saying, hey, there's help available. If you just want to get back to your work and get it done more quickly and more efficiently, here are resources in order to do that, or a service that can be provided.
Yes. And so let me talk you through how most people have used our service, right? In the beginning, there's the grant application. Always and eternally. And so before the beginning is the what tools are we going to bundle into our grant application? And so a lot of people have come to us and said, all right, well, we're thinking about using FAIMS next year. What do we need to put in our grant to have FAIMS support? We are happy to provide that. After they have an idea of what they're going to study, then they can come to one of our project managers. And in 2015, we actually have a professional business analyst from Intersect, Jared Berghold, handling most of our client interactions. And so you can email inquiries@fedarc.org if you're interested in using FAIMS in the field. And so what happens is we figure out what it is that you want. And that is one of those sentences that contains a shared understanding of what it is that you want is actually quite tricky. Because there's quite a lot of tacit information bundled up in those requests. And so what eventually comes out of it is, okay, we recognize that you need a module that does these things, and we have paper prototypes so that everyone has a visual understanding of what these things are by this date, and you have agreed to test these, and so you have a paper prototype so that there's this shared understanding. And we have a timetable of deliverables. And so we have this, you are going into the field in this date. Therefore, because we do not want to develop for you while you are in the field, because connections in the middle of Turkey, connections in the middle of Africa, connections in the middle of Peru tend to be atrocious. Not that we have scars for that at all.
No, I'm sure.
You agree to test your module in realistic conditions beforehand so that we can figure out if it actually does everything that you want it to do. And then we have a series of deliverables scheduled. And then we have programmers who can create your module for you. And then whatever assorted infrastructure is necessary, be it exporters or be it a FAIMS in a box, is also created and shipped to you. And so we have a hardware partner, Sol One Solutions in North Sydney, who has created FAIMS in a box for us. And it is a hard case containing a server, containing an industrial access point, containing generally 4 tablets, containing a ruggedized backup case, containing a FAIMS backup key, which you can plug into any computer and it'll turn it into a FAIMS computer. Hopefully there's nothing on that computer that you wanted.
Because it's going to be the FAIMS machine from there on out.
Because it will become the FAIMS machine, yes. Mind you, at the same time, you can plug it into a headless, unattended computer, and it'll turn it into a FAIMS computer. So that's where it came from on that call. And so you can have hardware that you bring into the field that all you need to do is plug into power and connect up the Ethernet cords, and you can be running in the field in a matter of minutes. So long as we have adequate prep time, and that's one of those really big underscored things, you can have an extremely smooth experience in the field because everything's tested and designed to work together, and so you're not trying to configure things in the middle of nowhere with no internet connection.
Well, and I have to imagine that part of that testing the modules also includes some training of the people that will at least be responsible for supervising out in the field.
And so we generally create manuals, and we have attended a number of training sessions for these modules so that people can become. It's part of the testing process, right? So the people who do the testing should be the people who use the module, so that there's this process of acculturation to the module in comfortable, non-stressed environments. And yes, we offer training, and we're happy to fly out to wherever you are and train you or your team leaders or your team in this.
Well, and that's something that I've wished for in the past, as opposed to being thrown out in the field with a data collector that maybe one person understands, or
yes,
especially GIS tools, a GIS data collector, is that often there are things that an ounce of prevention would have helped immensely in things like taking a shapefile or waiting for points to average, that really some sort of training in, like you said, realistic field conditions with that specific technology would save a lot of trouble and frustration on the back end. It's just having that modicum of, here's troubles you may encounter, here's how to resolve them, here's when you might want to call in an expert to say, how do I solve this? And just things of that nature.
And one of the major things that purchasing a module from us purchases is support. And so because we're familiar with your module and because we're familiar with your process, we are on hand to support you when you're in the field. And because we've gone through this testing process with you before you've gone into the field, there's this shared language and shared understanding of all of the tools. With that said, the modal request we get is, I'm going into the field in 2 weeks, can I have a data collector, please? And our response
and what is your
to that
typical
is
response to that request? No.
no.
You can have it, what, fast, cheap, or well done?
Choose one, yes. And well, it's more of trying to impress, like, the problem is that creating a FAIMS module, and especially the amount of testing needed for something that's going to be used in a destructive environment, and therefore it must work the first time, is significant. And so, 80% of the work is requirements generation. Another 80% of the work is programming the module, and the last 80% of the work is testing and refinement as people discover that what they meant isn't what they want.
Yes. But it sounds like throughout all of this, the work and maybe even overcoming a little bit of fear or misunderstanding about using some of these tools versus traditionally taking notes in field notebooks and paper, have people, besides Andy, because I just saw his quote and I'll read it, but have people found it overall worth the effort to learn these tools?
Absolutely.
Or we had some people say, I'm going back to paper, it didn't work one time.
We've had a great deal of very happy feedback. I know Sean and Adela and Penny and Parker and Andy et al. Did a wonderful workshop at AAA recently. And so if you could do a brief chat with Parker and Andy and Jessica, to get their feedback, we've had a number of satisfied customers.
I will add them to my guest list because I'd really love to talk to some of the archaeologists that are using these tools. And I really think this is getting to be the point that digital data collection is the way things are going to go, and in many cases need to go. And I think as good as it is to have the ability to go back to paper and other things in terms of dire need or in terms of backup, or especially to understand why these tools are being created, it's going to be extremely hard to duplicate the results in terms of efficiency and also just in terms of the ability to make decisions and get the highest quality data when you're out there doing destructive field work.
Absolutely. And so something that people don't tend to realize until they're out there, but the ability to take 3 or 4 pictures of every single thing and immediately associate those pictures and the video and that audio with a record is liberating.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I say that Parker's database was only 100 megs. His entire module came out at about 6 gigs because of all of the photos he took. And so our system handles that without blinking because, well, actually, it did blink a little bit, but it was a wonderful learning experience. It now handles that without blinking because it just makes so much richer data.
Well, and what I found especially is the addition of pictures and then also the addition of having very specific information about who is taking a record, when, and where. 9 times out of 10 cleared up almost any ambiguity that we had in field notes back in the office. Whereas before, I've worked on projects where there's ambiguity between 2 records if we weren't sure they're the same one or which one to prefer. Say someone duplicated a form, but it was just different enough to make us wonder. We would have to track down the person usually through their initials because they were tired of writing out their full name, contacting these people, trying to look up a good phone number, email address, waiting for them to get back to us. But having the picture would clear up, this is a different feature or this is a different location right off the bat. But then also having the full name and contact information put in there through this database model, having that information associated with every change that's done, every update, every picture that's been taken. It was extremely useful for those types of error checking purposes.
Yes, and that's why I have such a detailed audit log.
Still recording on paper in the field? Hate having to process hundreds of site records when you get back to the office and would rather go straight to report writing and research? DigTech has the answer. Hi, I'm Chris Webster, founder of DigTech LLC, a disabled veteran-owned CRM firm and archaeological technology research and development firm. At DigTech, we're creating applications for smartphones and tablets that will increase efficiency in the field and will keep archaeologists doing what they love, archaeology, and will reduce the amount of busy work in the office. Some of what we do involves enhancing existing third-party applications that are already on the app stores. Use our consultation form on the website at www.digtech-llc.com/tablet, and we'll help you figure out what digital solution is best for you. The cost of going digital is a lot less than you think, and once you do it, you'll wonder why you ever recorded on paper to begin with. Contact Chris over at DigTech, the parent company of the Archaeology Podcast Network, today, and let DigTech help you save paper, save time, save resources, and go digital. Now, back to the show.
So, Brian, could you tell us a little bit about your personal research and some of the things that you're looking to pursue at your new university?
So, my personal research is, let us say, eclectic. I'm interested in a number of widely disparate topics. I'm very interested in what amounts to role-playing game theory, the structural and theoretical underpinnings of role-playing games. I think that it's actually a fascinating philosophical and sociological topic of how do these games work. And one of the papers that I'm currently trying to figure out how to publish is applying information technology requirements analysis to role-playing game character creation, so that you can create the character that you want to create and have means of testing whether or not that character is the character that you want to create.
So this would be in terms of saying, I want my character to be able to do these sorts of things or have this sort of dialogue options, or
yes,
being able to act as this sort of say, moral choice. What in this rule system would apply to that to make that something that is rules appropriate?
What in this game? So what in this in the combination of rule system, decisions by the game master, decisions of the game world and setting allow for these story elements or these mechanical elements or these gameplay elements to come to the surface. The other research that I'm doing right now is I'm working on a paper about what amounts to the philosophy of spreadsheets. And so this is an extension of my philosophy of data work, and it's a reaction to what I've been seeing as archaeologists give us models of data and to come forward. And there seems to be this gulf of technique where it seems like there's a class of archaeologists. And I'm going to couch this in it seems, and it's entirely subjective, right? So this is a philosophical inquiry based on my experiences. This is not any kind of normative. All archaeologists are this way. Just trying to make sure that this is my current research in progress, right?
Yes.
But I've seen that there seem to be these classes of archaeologists who demand that their paper forms be ideographic, to be mimicking the paper form, so that you have the spreadsheets mimicking the paper forms, which mimic the real. And so there's no structure to them. There's no formal pattern to them. There is mimesis. And
this
so
would be an example of like skeuomorphism. Say for Apple, I know for a long time has used.
Yes.
Say a voice recorder that looks like it's an 8-track tape player, or that looks like it's recording audio on a reel-to-reel, because people are maybe perhaps more familiar with those tools.
It's almost, but not quite, unlike skeuomorphism. Instead of the visual similarity of appearance, there is the pattern similarity of recording. And so you have in a spreadsheet, you have notes entered in everything. You have multiple lines where additional finds, where additional details are recorded, and you have an organic record of the thing that focuses primarily on the thing being recorded. And so you have a pottery shard that takes 3 rows to record because there are some details that require more than one cell to record. Sometimes the inner fabric and the outer fabric are different, and they require amplification and so on and so forth. And so you have something that is purely organic and in the archaeologist who created it mind matches the object exactly and is almost entirely impossible to analyze.
But that there's meaning embedded in these, say,
yes.
For instance, I've seen color codes used. The first row might have green equals, positive, red equals negative. And that
yes.
is used almost like a highlighter pen throughout the spreadsheet. But it's not something you can sort by.
Yes.
It's not something you can use in aggregate or that you can enumerate programmatically. It's something that, like a paper form, just in a digital format, you have to go through as a human and count them up individually.
Precisely. And it's these intensely human skeuomorphisms that create the replication or the mimicry of the paper form and the replication or mimicry of the real object. And then I've seen a class of archaeologists who come from as far as I can tell, a more technical background who treat the spreadsheet as data source and who have a design and stick to that design. And so on that example, everything is a series of codes, and you will conform to the codes, and you will do analysis that way. And that's much more a nomothetic or rules-based or law-based approach to the process. And so what I'm working on is trying to apply Rickert's categories of nomothetic and ideographic, which is this huge logical positivism fight in the early 20th century to people's approaches to spreadsheets, because I think it's A, a lot less contentious, and B, a really interesting research problem.
Well, it seems like, anecdotally, that's something I experienced, that it's not, in my experience, a classification between older archaeologists or younger archaeologists. It's a combination of how people were raised, both by parents,
Yes.
but also by the last generation of archaeologists that trained them, and their level of comfort with technology, whether they see, perhaps a computer as a place where literal folders and documents live, or as a hard drive that's full of ones and zeros that can be organized in many ways, but also referenced in many different views and take on many different forms, and they're aware of where those possibilities expand versus a paper format.
So I'm going to step back from the almost the judgment in what you described. It's more of a apprenticeship of the affordances provided by the computer and what a computer is good for. And so, I know entirely too many technologists where folders are where documents go to die. To be, but with that said, it's the apprenticeship of higher degree programs and the mentoring and all of that is where people are made aware of what is possible and expected of their computing devices. And so by studying these tacit understandings of technology, I hope to allow some discussion to take place and for people to become aware of what they've learned so that they may choose to modify it if they wish.
Making it kind of a conscious, here's an alternative, whether that's one direction or another, not putting, like you said, a value judgment on it, but just being aware that there are people that see it differently, or that there are different limitations imposed by each different view and different possibilities opened up by those views as well.
And hopefully this is an argument reduction mechanism where people realize that they're actually speaking different languages rather than, why doesn't this person do it this way? What are they thinking? They're so stupid. It's, oh, they have a different model of computing. oh, this is why we're not communicating well. Okay, let's establish a trading language where we both understand this word to mean the same thing. Oh, hey, this argument isn't an argument anymore.
That does seem like it would be a useful tool in those scenarios, and as you said, just interesting research topic in terms of trying to get at people's mental models of
Yes.
how the world works, or how, as you said, data can be organized.
Yes.
So going back to the role-playing game topic for a minute, how did you get involved in the deep philosophy of role-playing games? Because I think that's perhaps something that some people see as a non-academic specialty, but just like literature, just like many other things, it kind of opens up this window at how people think or how people play within the rule systems that they're given, whether that's in a role-playing game or in a workplace or
Yes.
kind of the different ways of approaching things. I know there was a recent PBS episode of a show that they have on YouTube that was talking about role-playing games as training for life in terms of putting people in unique and extraordinary situations, and then those skills that they gained through thinking about a problem, coming up with solutions, did actually transfer to real-life situations as well.
So the downside of philosophy is that it's infectious. You can't only ask why about a narrow subset of things. Once you start asking why, you keep asking why, and it turtles all the way down. And so, I've always been interested in philosophy, just like I've always been interested in technology. And so, in my infotech program, people looked at me strangely because I kept asking why. And so in role-playing games, it's the exact same thing. I try to figure out the philosophies of the thing because that's how I understand the thing. It is the epistemological, what categories is this thing? What is this thing's nature? What is this thing? What is not this thing? And so basically what I've realized is that no one is writing about role-playing games in this way, where there's the pragmatics of role-playing games, and it's an extension of game theory, and it's an extension of philosophy. It's applied game theory.
Well, it reminds me in some ways of the academic literature on, say, text games or ergodonic fiction, where it's a non-passive experience. You have to actually engage with the text and make decisions, make choices, and it's a non-trivial effort put forth in interacting with that medium.
Yeah, and so there are some fascinating challenges imposed by the medium, and there are some fascinating applications that one can do using the methods of role-playing games in other venues. But mainly I can't stop asking why, and so I might as well get some papers out of it.
That sounds like an excellent way to focus your research. If you're going to be having brain cycles taken up by this thing you just can't get rid of, you might as well turn it into a dissertation or turn it into a paper.
Precisely. Amusingly enough, after my PhD was over, I counted up the number of words in my dissertation and the number of words in the Stack Exchange answers I answered at the same time, and they were about equal. Which just I don't want to think about how much effort that is, but yeah, it's I like thinking in this way, and so I will think in this way, and hopefully I'll get some papers and academic credit for it.
So how did you get involved? For some of the listeners that may not be familiar with it, Stack Exchange is a website that has a whole bunch of different topics such as GIS or programming or role-playing games or life, where people can ask questions, and then it's gamified a little bit in that you can gain credit or +1 attributes to your online persona for answering questions in a good manner.
Specifically, you gain reputation, and the idea of reputation. I actually dislike the gamification term for it, because in the Stack Exchange, it's experts answering expert questions, right? It is, and I can actually get the formal motto somewhere, but it's an expression of expertise, right? And so reputation isn't just a meaningless number, it's a number of how, in what esteem are you held by the community. And so it's not a meaningless, oh, hey, your points are going up. It's a, you have helped this many people. This many people think that what you say in this domain matters.
You actively engaged, and according to whatever criteria, people found it useful. And not just,
Precisely.
like you said, in a points value, but in, hey, this helps somebody solve a problem or answer a burning question that, just had to be answered.
Absolutely. And so it is helping people with expert questions and expert advice that is the essence of the Stack Exchange experience.
Brings to mind some conversations I know that perhaps you, but I know definitely the Kansas of Open Context have talked about in terms of academic publication and receiving merit or notice for those, sometimes in non-traditional ways. Maybe in the future there'll be a archaeology Stack Exchange where experts can publish information and data and interpretations, and those that are useful may rise to the top. Those that are not as useful may not rise so high.
Absolutely. If we're going to say that, there is indeed an anthropology, which includes archaeology, Stack Exchange being proposed. And so if 50 people commit to the anthropology Stack Exchange, there will in fact be one.
Well, you heard it there, listeners. If we can get 50 of you out there, maybe 40, 49, and 48 with Doug and I included, maybe we can get this group going and have a venue for posing questions and seeing what answers are good and what people are knowledgeable that maybe wouldn't otherwise be participating in the conversation. I know many times Lorna Richardson, who we had on as a guest a while ago, was talking about online venues as places that sometimes have a leveling effect on conversations. In that, for instance, I can talk to Brian, who is much more skilled at database knowledge and building than I am, but we can talk on somewhat of an even keel without having to say, oh, you're a doctor of this and this, and therefore my experience or knowledge is nowhere comparable to you. We can have a discussion online that is more equal-sided.
Absolutely. And it would be wonderful to see archaeology have its own venue where questions and these answers can be posed.
Mm-hmm. So the current research that you're working on now, how does that work now that you've switched universities? Because it sounds like you and Sean and Adela both have kind of moved to this new university. And along with that, the FAIMS project has moved as well?
Correct. So the FAIMS project lifted up in early December and is setting down in the next few weeks. But none of the people have changed. And so my primary job is indeed supporting the FAIMS project, making sure our servers don't fall over, writing exporters, managing our programmers, managing our requirements, and so on and so forth. And so in whatever free time I can scrounge, I am welcome to do my own research.
That sounds like an enviable position in order to, oftentimes have tweaks and things that you can change, but really be on call whenever things do blow up. But for the most part, being able to pursue some of your own interests with some university support.
That is indeed the ideal that is being proposed.
Well, great. I really wish you luck with that. And Shauna and Adela both, I know, have been extremely busy with a new child. So yes. I'm interested to see how FAIMS develops in the next few years.
So are we.
Well, Brian, is there anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of projects or in terms of your diverse interests? I'm sure there's more than, as you said, the more questions you ask, the more questions you find need to be asked.
I think this has been pretty comprehensive so far. Obviously, all of these topics are fractal, mm-hmm. And so we can go on for hours and hours on any iota of any of these topics. But as a general overview of my current research interests, yeah.
Well, I'll ask one final question, which is always dangerous. but given your experience with role-playing games, have you any idea why archaeologists are so prominently featured in things like Pathfinder or in Numenera? I know is a new one that has an archaeologist class, or even the Star Wars role-playing game has a specific archaeology character.
Indiana Jones.
Ah.
Well, okay, so it
always
is
comes back to Indiana.
Well, so it's more. It is a good archetype for the idea of discovery, and so when a player announces that they are an archaeologist, especially if they are not an academic archaeologist, right? So this is going by archetypes. This isn't going by professional standards. What they're saying is, I am interested in this game in exploration and discovery. And so, I told you not to ask these questions.
No, this is great.
So, in 5th edition D&D, they claim to support 3 pillars of combat, exploration, and social. And so the archaeologist class is the. So first, the archaeologist class is archetypally equivalent to the rogue class, right? Their job as created by their archetype as created by popular fiction is to go into dangerous tombs that apparently still have functioning machinery after thousands of years, including lamps. Let's not forget the lamps.
Mm-hmm.
Disable the
torches.
devices. Yep. Disable the devices, figure out what's going on, and in general engage with the environment as a character. And so when they say, I'm a rogue or I'm an archaeologist, what they're saying is, I am interested not in conflict. I don't want to make pew-pew sounds at other things. And I'm not interested in arguments with other characters. I'm interested in testing my wits against the environment, and I'm interested in almost literally unearthing the secrets held by that environment. And so that's why that archetype is so powerful, because everyone has the idea of the discoverer of ancient ruins, the discoverer of mysteries, of secrets, in a set aside from the esoteric mysteries, right? So you have your occults and your adepts and whatnot who are embedded in the mysteries, but the archetype of the archaeologist steps aside from the mysteries and is the revealer and disabler of traps, the revealer of mysteries, the publisher for acclaim. And so you have Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, you have Indiana Jones, and both of those archetypes are spat upon by archaeologists quite rightfully. But as an archetypal discoverer and revealer of hidden truths, that is why the class is so interesting.
I think you've just explained why I always choose to play a rogue.
Excellent.
Well, and my personal experience has been when I play Call of Cthulhu, I'm the archaeologist spending time in the library reading things that should not be read, and it'll probably end the way my career will, going insane.
Well, you made the first mistake. If there's a book in Call of Cthulhu, don't open it.
Nothing good lies in reading. That's what I've learned.
Not in Call of Cthulhu.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Brian. I've really enjoyed our discussion, and especially glad I asked that last question. Love to have you and some other members of the FAIMS team back on again, if that ever becomes a possibility.
100%.
Really looking forward to FAIMS 2.0. It's been a project that I've followed for a while and hope to use more in the future, because I really think that along with all the other data collectors, it's a unique approach that I think is very well thought out and systematically tested. And
so
excited to see what happens in the
2.0
future.
FAIMS 2.0 is available on the App Store for free right now. So if you go to play.google.com and search for FAIMS, you can download it. Our demo server is operational, and we have 7 modules and a sample exporter on that server to play with. And if you email inquiries@fedarch.org, we are happy to talk to you, to your specific requirements, and talk you through how the app works and how it fits what you need to do.
Excellent. And I'll be sure to put those and other links that we mentioned throughout the show in the show notes that will be available on the Archaeology Podcast Network website.
Fantastic.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast, and thanks to Brian, my guest. We'll see you in the field.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.